It's clearly understood. The last thing we want to do is make any recommendations. Somebody think, well, we're doing that because somebody lives there, because Mr. Vine lives there, because Mr. Jennifer lives there, because Mr. Alex, anybody, we're not making, sorry? Were you live? Great. Welcome back, everybody. We're officially opening our mid-mod meeting. I would like to introduce our partner that's here. He's in the back listening, Mr. Pat. He's here with our consulting agency that is here to listen to your recommendations. Hey, Rick, could you mute yourself? Poor guy's coughing. All right. What we've done to this point, we did in the first part of the meeting is we introduced all the different areas, all the different leaks that we have, all the different drainage areas that we have throughout the city. Kyle, could you pull up the map? We've done now is we narrowed down to zoned in or honed in on what's called area or zones 1 through 12. Could you zoom in one more and try to center it if you can, Kyle? So it's a little bit easier to see so everybody has a general idea what we're talking about. Okay. Not to exclude any of the others, but the reason why you don't see so much of zones 13, 14, and 15, sorry. The reason you don't see so much of the other zones is because thankfully those zones don't have so many leaks. Okay. We're thankful and blessed for that. This entire map encompasses the entire city. The city up to this point has told us through different meetings publicly and people just calling and saying, hey, I have a problem with our water, that water is our top priority. We've been lucky enough to be allocated $4.1 million that we can use, and some of the qualifying factors include fixing our water, which is why we're the most ready to proceed with that now. Now we have a very tight timeline. Mr. Patrick, if I speak out of turn anyway, please correct me. But we're in a very tight timeline to put in our application to get these funds for these specific projects. So your feedback is vital so we can try to bring something collective to council to listen to and to review specific to these zones and fixing some of this water. Now, yes, we have 15 zones, but we focus on the first 12. Ideally, if it was me, I'd tell you, well, let's fix as many zones as we can. Forget the number of leaks, forget the number of stuff. Let's fix as many as we can and let's just get as much done as we can. The truth is that doesn't make sense. It depends on how you look at it. Do you look at it by number of leaks? Do you look at it based on the number of priority 1 leaks that were identified back in the 2016, 2017 data that was shared? Do you look at it equitably so that you're talking about which district gets what? At the end of the day, that's where the consensus is what we need based on your feedback. Because inevitably, when we talk about fairness and everything that we're doing, we don't have enough money to do all 12 of these zones. We don't, not right now. Not with some rich uncle. If anybody knows the gentleman that placed that big bet on the Astros, maybe you can donate some dollars our way. Hey. I don't. No, I don't, but maybe, you know, maybe somebody can help. I'm not sure, but nonetheless, where we are now is moving forward with these allocations.
Well, the zones that you're talking about are pretty much in the older part of town too.
Yes.
So you've got the older pipes, the older area, the more likely to break, that is showing that they really are the ones that are having frequent breaks and the worst issues. I mean, it just makes sense to go out from the oldest area into the newest. And again, your data that you do have is, even if it's based on older data, it still seems to be legitimate in the way you've got it set up to me.
Absolutely. And the strategy behind that is that looking at what these areas or these zones cost, you're looking at the top zone, which is zone 7 up here, that is shown up here, is one of the most expensive to fix. All right, it's got 14 priority 1 leaks. And in today's dollars, what we're expecting, we're hoping, we're prospecting, that eats up almost the entire $4 million. So it's 3.22, approximately 3.25 to fix that area. That's zone 7. However, you could identify some of the next lowest, which were the ones that have 12 priority 1 leaks, which is zone 3, which is got 12 priority 1 leaks, and zone 8, which has got 12 priority 1 leaks. If you do that, according to your map, it's on some different parts of town. If you look at 3 and 8, 3 and 8 being where they are. Okay. 3 and 8 constitute spread over some of the districts. However, But the dollar value puts you at about 3.8 million, pretty close to where the $4.1 million number is.
Is the population essentially similar between the different zones?
Yes, for the most
You're
part.
not talking about one zone's all residential, one has 4 houses and 8 storage facilities.
Correct. And then the other aspect of that, I'm glad you said that. If you look at area 3, scroll up a little bit, just a little bit, so we see the whole zone 3. Like, scroll just a little bit higher. Zone 3 or area 3, it's shown up here, right there, perfect. Area 3 is shown. Also happens to be an area of town that is not considered the highest LMI. All right, the low to moderate income. I guess the old downtown district, which is area 3. Okay, so having said that, that area may not be, and Pat, you could probably tell us better, may or may not be as favorably looked at when the application is submitted. What are your thoughts on that?
Good evening, everybody. Contingent on the funding. You have $4.1 million allocated to the city. The requirements are that you have to spend half of that on a low to moderate income area population. The other half to be spent on an area that's not designated low. Okay, so 50% of the funds can, say, for example, if we look at the data and area 3 is not low income based on, and this is census data that we use, then you can only spend half of them. Right? If you evaluate the project area, area 7, area 1, area 4, wherever you land, and it is LMI, then you can spend all of your money there if you chose to, or you can spend half of your money there and spend the other half in an area that is not LMI. And that's kind of the base level of the requirements for income related improvements for the grant.
Having said that, areas 3, 4, and 5 fall into zones, into parts that are not considered LMI, portions of them. The majority of 3 and portions of 4 and 5 do not fall in the LMI. Coincidentally, those are some of the halfway more expensive ones. Having said that, if you were to allocate your funds accordingly, it behooves you to look at 1, 2, 6, 7, 8, and 11. Sorry.
Quick question.
Yes, sir.
Between area 9 and 10 and 3, or 10 and 2, the goal line, what street is that?
If I'm not mistaken, that's Lake.
And road?
I'm pretty sure that's Lake. That separates those 2 zones. Mhm. It is right. So, hence our dilemma here.
Just for clarity,
Yes, sir.
the LMI calculation, that's by census tract.
Yes, sir.
So the administrator, you have an overlay that has our census tract with the LMI information?
Yeah, I'm gonna drop that too. Yeah, we do. I can send that.
Because from,
Want to send to Kyle?
I just say that because from my other work, basically our original settlement of Marque is considered LMI,
Well,
except for the west side.
I'll tell you this, there's a lot of ways that you identify low market populations. And one of those ways is you're designated as a city, right? So it's by place.
Yeah.
And by place, the city of Marque is a low to moderate income community, right? And that's good in terms of some of the grants that we pursue. But whenever you're looking at a project, an area that's specific to the area, then we can't use that. Because that's not going to benefit the entire city, right? I mean, some projects could benefit the entire city, focus in the area. So let's just say that this is not one of them. Then we can't use that data. Then we've got to utilize the abstract block data that exists, that we have access to. Everyone has access. Or we have to do income surveys, right, where we have to go to the door, and we have to ask folks like y'all, and people like me, and say, hey, how much money do you make? Right, based on household size, those are the ways, those are the ways, that we can do that, I'll send you.
Yeah, if we could share that while you guys are working on sharing that. The idea is, and I can tell you, because this LMI is almost embedded into my brain for these zones, as much as I looked at it. A good majority of 3 falls into that non-LMI. Portions of 4 and 5 fall into that. It might scurry an edge into 2, an edge into 1, but you'll see it in a second. What I read my brain trying to do was to superimpose these one on top of the other. But I'm not the most tech savvy, and quite frankly, I started paper macheing. Felt like I was in kindergarten again. It just didn't work. It was not pretty.
Mostly qualify for your LMI regulation.
Everything right now, with the exception of 3 parts of 4 and parts of 5, for the most part, is 50% or more.
So 1 and 2 for sure.
1 and 2 for the most, except for tiny outskirts of them, yes. Remember, we're going by a study that was done, not taking LMI into consideration and trying to overlay it with a LMI.
So 1 and 2 and 6 and 7 would keep the balance of grant regulation.
Absolutely. Completely 6 and 7, 11, 8, 9, 10, 12, all fall outside of those areas. The ones in question partially are basically the ones, what is that, pink? Is that pink? Somebody help me out. Is that pink, light pink? Shaded, whatever colors 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are. Peach, okay, peach. Coincidentally, the sad part about that is if I look at how many priority 1 leaks are in 1 through 5, the math equates to 23 plus 18 is 41.
And you just don't have the money to do them, so you have.
Not at this time. So for example, this is a dilemma that we sit with every day, right? For example, if you told us, look, maybe do the other stuff with the funding you do have, or as many as you can, right, incorporate with what you have, and then come back and maybe we issue a CO or a bond or some state revolving funds that we go after. Let's do it for some of the other zones instead. And that's what we're recommending. That's what makes the most sense. Use these dollars that have been allocated for this now, because you have it, to address the parts that you know you'll be able to get. And honestly, we are anxious to we're chomping at the bit to get going because we need to earn the public's trust back. That's something that we as a staff, as a team, as a group, as a leadership group, we're ready to go. This is the overlay map, I'm sorry.
I've always said that there's no reason why Marque is not a booming town, considering our location. How close we're at I-45, we're right between the high dollar crazy people in Galveston and the high dollar crazy people in League City. We should be tearing it up.
It's coming.
But our city past management and infrastructure and failure to keep things updated has held this place back, in the opinion of someone who sat in office for 42 years. So that's worth a partial amount of water. But it's important to get it done for the viability of the future of the city.
It's coming.
Whatever we need to do to get it started and get it done, start with what you can get done in 1 and 2, because they fit your criteria. They're the oldest part of town. It's not one zone that takes all the money, and you can at least get some centralization of where the problems are and get a big chunk fixed in one area and see results.
Very good. We would hope so. So
How do you get a logo deal?
well,
What a military discount.
It's almost Veterans Day, right? I'm glad that that's kind of where we've turned the discussion. So originally zone 6, if you notice zone 6, I'm glad that this map is up here. If you notice where it says track 7262 up there, that's a culmination of your zones 6, 7, 11 that were shown before, right?
On the other side of Highway.
Yes, that's the other side of Highway 3. So it's between 3 and 146. Correct. So the issue or the concern, the challenge there, well, the good thing, right? in today's dollars, it would have cost 3.8 to get that done, but because those 3.5, almost 4 streets were completed, that price was reduced to about 2.8. So that's a good chunk that you could do. But then we talk about, again, equity, right? If we go after 6, 7, and 8, you're addressing mostly District D and not a whole lot of B. Does that weigh into our decision? Does that weigh into our, not decision, excuse me, decision made by council, right? Does that weigh into our final recommendation? Based on. Absolutely,
Whether or not you live in A, B, C, or D. They're all residents.
true,
That's my,
Yeah,
true.
do the most you can with what you got that keeps the dogs of the rent regulations happy
Okay,
in general.
I think we need better data in seeing that chart. I mean, I know Rick came in November, December, whenever that was, but to give us that chart that is not completely filled out. I mean, just at least in the time that he's been here and asked us to make a decision. What is our EDC doing to bring in more tax dollars to the city besides us going out and having to get revolving state funds, certificates of obligation, what is the EDC doing to offset some of this expense and bringing in the businesses that we so desperately need here?
That's the proverbial catch-22. You have to fix the city to get people to want to be here, but you gotta have people here.
Well,
who have
we're
the money
making
to
more
fix
than the
the
city manager.
well, thank you, the first step to that is a big challenge that we faced together when we first, I could say for my time together, the biggest challenge was our request for water. Right? We were hovering around our allocation of water, didn't correct me if I'm wrong, we were right at about the max, where we could not continue to support much more of our own residential development, much less attract others. We made a very aggressive approach to increase our water. Now, the argument at that time could have been, well, why don't you fix the leaks and then you won't need so much more water? The truth is, even if we fix the leaks to get the growth that we're expecting, we're gonna need to fix those leaks and the additional water to sustain everything that we're trying to do. And it goes back to us chasing our tail. Which one comes first? Which one do we use to drive the next? So that's where we stand now. That's where we are now, and that's where we're going to continue to push this thing forward.
We just need to put casinos in town.
Having said that, where the next step of this, and then again, our next phase is to confirm the overlay. But if you notice, this little green patch of track is right here. This little green track here. This little green track does not fall in the actual LMI. So you notice that little, that's essentially what's considered your downtown district. Okay, that's essentially what that is called. That's your downtown district for the most part in the neighborhoods around it.
Business more than residential.
Correct. Now, do me a favor, Kyle, go back really quickly from that superimposed to the next one.
So let's just.
Yes,
All the pages are LMI.
yes.
That was wrong.
So now if you notice that most of that falls in area 3. Hence why I recommended area 3, which happens to have 12 priority 1 leaks, probably not be what we use these funds for. That was the reasoning why. That was a request one. Portions of 4 and 5 absolutely do fall, but we run that risk of how much or what percentage close to it becomes to that 50%. Okay, I guess in this sense, our next phase is gauging what we've been told is, for the most part, is get the information from all the different locations and move this forward based on what we can afford.
Yeah, I mean, we need to have, given the timeline, just real briefly, so that, I guess everybody knows. The application is due on January 9th. Okay, and it's not,
2 days.
January 9th.
January 9th.
Yeah.
But in order to get there, we've got to work through, it's one thing to sort of put on the screen the areas that qualify as LMI. We have to.
Yeah, they have all the data and
Right, I just
dot
want
the Ts, dot the Is.
Precisely, because we have to present that in an application to the general office, and then, so the engineers need to be able to do their analysis, and we've got to get budgets, and we've got to get exhibits, and all of that, and that takes time. And, we've got to be able to package that up and put that out for a 14-day comment period. So we're gonna give the public a chance to say, oh, so this is what you all selected, and okay, well, that's more time. And
Well-
then there's the working through, the governing body to finalize that decision. So you factor in all of that, not a lot of time. Right, we got holidays, we got New Year, so we're, January not gonna be a deadline, but we don't have as much time as with that stuff. So decisions coming from today, that will give the consulting group an opportunity to create a really well-developed project, that will do good for the community. That's the objective. That's what sort of we're hoping for.
And that takes us to the next area of concern. If you notice your map, area 6, that's the area where those 3.5 streets were done already. Why were those 3.5 streets selected? What was the reasoning behind it? All I could tell you is at the time there was 10 priority 1 leaks. It's in District D, and I can only assume that there was probably a lot of leaks going on at that time when this decision was made to attack that portion. Also, Rick, I know you're still on the call. Area 6, then you're here as well. Is area 6 not the place where we have the most dead end fire hydrants? And are probably biggest area of concern in the community for safety concerns when it comes to our water supply?
Yeah, area 6 and area 7 is a high priority. The highest of, the lines there are older. There's more susceptible. There's very little hydrants in that area, except for the one that was recently placed in 2019, I believe. So that side of Highway 3 is probably the highest in our opinion, just based on our review of these areas.
So based on that information, the priority would be 6 and 7. The problem is those two combined are about, rough math, about $6.1 million, and we only have 4. So as a counter to that, I would say 6 and 8. Why 8? Well, 8, if you remember, we told you that's an area we're gonna be ripping up soon anyways, because we're gonna get the Main Street sidewalks.
So one thing I'd like to bring up,
So
why we're,
I had 2 comments, I believe. No? Anyone else besides? Mayor, go ahead. Mayor Pro Tem.
4.1, which is that for mitigation amount,
Yes.
right? We still have the American Rescue Fund dollars. And I think that the feedback from your comment period with our online portal
Yes.
was 1.5 allocated from that to apart separate from the 4.1.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
are our numbers that we're really working with, I know we're using the 4.1 for purposes of completing the grant mitigation
Mhm.
request. But within that request, are we going to include the work that can be done with the 1.5 million, or if council approves it?
Should, my thought on that is ideally yes, but I can't bring a project to council yet until I can find out, one, that I gotta bring the entire list of appropriations down, and then secondly, prioritize this where it makes sense. So to answer your question, once that CIP is done and we have clear marching orders and we're ready to go, then yes, at that time, it would be based on that.
and one question we might want to pose to Patrick is from that loan process application, is there an issue with mixing the ARP money with the GLO money?
In this case, we would keep them separate, but go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, that's, entirely the jurisdiction's fault. So we're managing a lot of American Rescue Plan funds for cities, counties around the state. And we're mixing, if we've got a project that is, big enough that makes sense to complete a project, then our recommendation to our clients is to incorporate as much money as we can. And that's a local call, and there's some money earmarked, for other things, and that's certainly, but in terms of how we report that, the city, we just have to work with that firm that's managing those dollars if there is one, so if there's annual reports that go in. Timelines, things like that, in our opinion, we're recommending that for some of our other projects.
Can you switch back to the slide that has how many weeks and how many areas, what priorities?
Yeah, that was the Excel spreadsheet. It's all documented.
And then one other point, I was going to follow up on some comments from Den, especially on 6 and 7. Earlier this year, we had an underground leak on a water line up in area 6. Unfortunately, we had quite a few blocks and neighborhoods that had really low pressure, running down 30 PSI or lower. It took us a while to find that leak. It was not surfacing. We ended up finding it. It was ditching off into a storm pipe system. But 6 and 7, if you look at the map, you can tell that it's at the far end of the service for the city. Those areas, the reason they have low pressure over there and water quality pressure is because they're not looped as well as, say, areas 1 and 2, for instance. The pipelines that are in the center of the city, there is a lot of trunk lines going around those lines, 6-inch lines, 8-inch lines, 12-inch lines that are feeding all those 2-inch lines. Over in 6 and 7, unfortunately, that's not the case. We only have a few larger lines over there, and then everything else is 2-inch lines. On the study that was done in 2016, there was even some 1.5-inch lines, if you can believe that, that was providing water service to multiple houses in that section of the city. So over on that side of the railroad tracks, as I refer to it, that water system is far underserved than the water system that is in the main part of the city.
Well, it looks like 6 and 7 are the biggest problem areas anyway, and they're in the LMI.
Yep.
And it'll use up your money, and it focuses it pretty well concentrated in 2 districts that need it most. It seems.
The only issue with that is 6 and 7 exceed our allotment of 4.1. So instead,
The most in 6 and 7 with the money that you have and keep it out of the paper with that.
What about the other 1 point something?
so area 8, area 8, where we're at now, where we're talking about the main street that we need to do desperately as well. Area 8 had the second highest number of priority 1 leaks. We've identified and have the data. There's been at least 104 leaks there that staff has addressed. And it costs $1.12 million. And we're about to tear the sidewalks now, or the street now. And hopefully we can get those water lines replaced in time for when we get the new sidewalks put in from 45 all the way to 3.
And unlike the other pile of money, it doesn't have a criteria that a certain percentage of them minimum be in the lower middle income area.
Well, ARPA funds don't, but this 1.12 we could technically use for this. You could technically put zone 6 and zone 8, and you'd be 3.92 on the low end to, I mean, depending on the high end, how far it could go. I mean, I think we're gonna be right about the $4 million mark if we did 6 and 8 with these funds. And at the end of it, it kind of checks off the most boxes.
And it keeps the LMI part.
It keeps the LMI happy. It addresses us not tearing up a street twice. It addresses different districts. It addresses one of our worst parts. It addresses finishing a zone that was already started for whatever reason. Let's give credence to whoever was here when those 3.5 streets were done. Then correct me if I'm wrong. That was in 2018. It was kind of when it was done, 2018 to 2020. Right? Okay.
I'm sorry.
The area 6, when those 3 streets were done, when was that, 18, 20?
19.
18, 19?
So it takes care of oldest area, worst area, and the section keeps the LMI regulations happy, and it kills 2 birds with 1 stone and incorporating District 8 in there instead of District 7. So
Correct, and it also addresses, if you do 6 and 8, you're addressing what would have been 20 to 22 of those priority 1 zones,
it keeps it within the budget.
and it keeps it within the budget, correct? Yes, sir.
There's two quick items.
Mhm.
the scenario that you just laid out, like to be great. And if our grant administrator can put that conceptually together
Mhm.
pretty quickly, I'm willing to articulate collectively, I say with you and
Sure.
collectively articulate to the Houston Galveston Area Council for at least another $500,000 of the unallocated dollars that they have, which the first hearing and information session will be this Wednesday.
Well, I need to clarify that, because that's not entirely accurate. So, the public hearing that's on Wednesday for that is.
It's just an information session.
Right, well, that would be a public hearing.
So it's December.
Is related to Harvey Round One, what we call Harvey Round One. I mean, there's been a lot of iterations of funds to the state.
So it's not the mitigation dollar?
It's
No.
not- It's not.
Oh, I'm sorry, well, my mistake. Reason, yeah.
Yeah, that's the two
But
meetings.
there's still a possibility of, this would fall under that, correct? As an acceptable use?
I think it was more directed toward drainage. I think the jury's still out on that. We would still have to find out more.
I guess the Wednesday.
Wednesday and then the public hearing, they'll have one more.
Well, second comment is, this is follow up, a thought that Ms. Jennifer Earl had with EDC. That area that was outside of LMI, I would also like to encourage the EDC to assume the financial obligation for any of the infrastructure that's associated with that particular area. That's what other EDCs do when they put together a development plan. And it includes the underwater ground line, the water line. So that's something that I'm gonna put on my little notebook.
Absolutely.
Follow up with them, because that could easily be another $500,000 there.
Well,
Because that's people.
absolutely. And if area 3 from our map and the overlap of that LMI were to be symmetric, that is a tune of 2.5 of the total million of the total repairs that we would need. On the other aspect of it, since we do have the 1 to the 1.5 that we've allocated through ARPA, the zones, Kyle, could you go back to the map? But I think we've got clear direction as to 6 and 8 for the most part, unless I hear differently. But your discussion of what we would do if we had additional funds first. The other funds that fall in line somewhat financially with those numbers would be area 1 at 1.61. Area 2 at 1.27. Area 5 at 1.61. And area 8 at 1.12. And area 11 at 1.03. Now, obviously, there'll be a lot more discussion about that. It'll come up through ARPA. But just so, through the ARPA allocation, we'll bring it to council from the feedback that the committee's already given through their surveys. But I wanted you guys to collectively know that if that's the case, within somewhat reason or stretch, there could be additional 1, 2, 3, or 4 projects that we could maybe tackle with those funds, whenever that allocation is made.
Mr. Garcia, I just want to get this clear in my mind. We're only talking about the replacement of the 2-inch line
Yes, sir.
only.
Yes, sir.
So when this work is being done, we're not involved in any work on our water transmission lines that may or may not run in that area.
That's not correct.
Well,
We,
Understandable.
when we do these 2-inch water lines, what's going to happen is part of the project is we're actually constructing 6 and 8-inch water lines. We're moving the water lines out from the easements and putting the water lines out in the right of way, in the front part of a home. Because right now, these 2-inch water lines are in very bad locations. So as we replace these 6-inch water lines, we will be looking at the adjoining water lines that are connecting to these water lines and making sure that we're fixing the problem from a bigger picture. Admittedly, what we're looking at right now is 2-inch water lines. One of the things I just checked, for instance, right now in area 8, in the Melody Mary area, there's only 2 sections of 2-inch water lines. The rest of the water lines in that area are 6-inch water lines. So we could go in there and replace a couple sections of 2-inch water lines, But the issue you've got over there, you just don't have as many 2-inch water lines to deal with as what we do in 6 and 7, which the majority of those areas in 6 and 7 are serviced by 2-inch water lines. And it's just the way that those areas were constructed or built. So if we go into an area, we need to be able to look at all the water lines in there. Once we start doing water line work, I think you would agree, it's going to be smart of us to take a look at the entire system. What else do we need to do? And so that all comes up as we get into the design phase on getting these water lines done. Because we need to connect back into good water lines. And if we know we've got a bad 6-inch line based on historical data, we would we would benefit ourselves to take care of that 6-inch water line at the same time, if it's what is going to help us in the big picture. Because like I said, we're not just simply replacing 2-inch water lines where they lay, we're actually constructing new water lines in a whole new area from where the existing water lines are at. These are big projects.
Okay, Mr. Garcia, Mr. Saylor, having said that, that's what I kind of envisioned. But with that statement, are these numbers then still accurate that we're talking about for these zones?
The allocated amounts,
Yes,
yes.
there's that. Okay,
The entire work was encompassed into what the projection.
and so you're incorporating in your planning some reserve amount as well.
That's why it also behooves us to not be too tight. Because then if you look at the realm, let's say, for example, we chose to do, as we mentioned, 6 and 7, that puts us at 6. Well, even if we incorporated some of the ARPA funds to cover that, it still wouldn't be enough with our current allocation. So then portions of it would not be completed.
And Mr. Jim mentioned something earlier. He said the city normally receives $500,000 in CDBG annual allocation, that we're not in the title of the city, so that's coming via the county. If and when we receive those dollars, is that an amount of dollars that we can add to this project?
We should be able to. That's one of the considerations we're making. One of the items that we have to bring to council no later than January would be to go after that annual allotment of the $500,000. So we could do that then. So go ahead.
Let me elaborate. So there's different pots of money. What's most important now is to get a project so that the grant administrator can submit an application for. As far as the ARPA funding, which is available, if you include it in this package, it's going to increase the contract amount, and you're committed to that project. You can always figure out which area you want to prioritize after that fund, and then hit area 1, 2, 3, 4, whichever the public agrees to.
And to that point, we cannot do that before we bring that to council. And we're not ready to bring that to council until we finish our CIP.
But priority right now is
Right.
get that MITMOD submitted. Now, the CDBG fund, that comes once every 3 years. And you can't include that number yet because you don't have it. It hasn't been allocated.
It's a biannual program that the state of Texas, through a different agency, has competitions for. And it's very competitive. You cannot guarantee funding in any one of those cycles. The best case scenario is that we funded, once every 6 years. Right, so it's not an annual allocation to the city by any stretch. It's competition. But you have to compete with the rest of the region. So the 13, the 12 counties outside of, well, it's actually 10, we take up the pilot jurisdictions. So,
We don't have a pitiful Harvey card to play this year.
But we will, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. So essentially where we are is going back to this, and we keep going back. If we do 6 and 8, it brings in the threshold one would argue that 7 might be the highest level of need. Or 6 and 7. Or do we just tax 6 and a portion of 7 and do all we can? What I don't want it to be is, well, if you're only taxing 6 and 7, you're only taking care of one district, which is District D. Is that fair? Is that equitable? Is that in line with what we're trying to do with everything else?
But we talked about, zone 8 too. didn't we,
Mhm,
Because
correct.
You could double up on your projects and kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
And if we did, so to that point, if we did, for example, 7 and 8, it does drive the price tag up. It puts us more at 4.3, which again, to your point, once we say 4.3, we're committed to as much as we can do in those areas. We could always shave a portion of 8 off that is not included, a street or 2 to get us to the number we need to be.
Area 6 is actually residential, isn't that over there by the credit union and Texas First Bank and a lot of little businesses there that run down 1765?
There's a few, but there's also a lot of residential in that line. Mhm. And it's also got quite a few leaks, so ultimately,
7 is pretty dense as far as residential,
7 is there.
except the area that's closer to,
That close to Texas City.
and then north of 7 in the 6 range where Wisteria, and they're from residential. It's just as you get closer to the Highway 3 and 1765, you get more of the.
Yeah, because I usually run up 3 and then run down 1765 for Texas City, I just don't get back to the best.
so the consensus,
What you said earlier.
you tend to like the 7 and 8.
That takes care of, there was like 14 priority 1 and 7, and then there's 12 and 8.
And you
Us-
fixed 3.5 in area 6 that were some of the worst problems, correct?
Correct. So if the consensus is 7 and 8, it puts the minus whatever we need to do to get us to the 4 point, whatever the final number
That's
is.
just consensus.
Well, no, I'm just saying, I'm making sure I got the ask collectively from the group. I'd just like to know what everybody thinks.
What do you think?
I can't make a decision based on having the table with it complete.
Okay.
I mean, because you highlighted only 3 or 4 areas, what about the rest of the areas? I mean, I just don't feel like we have all the data.
Which is why we took it by, that was just extra data. The main data that we have is what's listed in priority 1, and we have that for all the zones. The number of leaks that we have is very incomplete data because some of it is caped as main lines versus regular lines. So that's what the difference is in distinguishing the two. And that's where we have the biggest efficiency in the data collection. However, one thing we do have is a priority 1 for every single one of these zones. And that's what we're basing our recommendation on.
But you're giving us all the data y'all have.
That we have, that's affirmative, that we know without a shadow of a doubt, when this study was done in 2016, that's what we have. Had we not been collecting data to this point, that's the only data we would have.
It's not likely that we're going to be better in those areas than them, and I don't want to not make a decision because we don't have a perfect set of data. And end up with nothing.
Well, I think it's a chart that's not even half complete at all. I mean, they have work orders, they have a system with work orders to see what type of work has been requested with addresses and all of that stuff. I mean, there is data there. And you know, how many of these priority ones have been caused by, in some of these areas, by TxDOT? I mean,
Or not in that area, textiles over.
no, I'm just saying, just as a whole, because I mean, you've got stuff on 1765 that's happening, you've had stuff on Highway 3, you've had stuff down 45 frontage road. I mean, are any of the ones that are being counted as priority, you know, from data of TxDOT issues?
You know, if you're talking
I-
about 6, 7, and 8.
I can tell you, I don't know how that would have put as part of this 2016 report.
They're all the 2-inch lines.
I don't think that's nothing. It would, one, it's probably not likely that what they would do in the areas they're at. And the second portion of that, I guess, to answer that question is if we go solely by priority 1 data, which is all we're trying to provide for you at this time. If you look at that, zone 7 is the worst. All right, it's got 14 priority 1s according to the 2016 study. It's the most fragile zone in the entire city.
And it qualifies for the low and middle income criteria.
It does.
And it's in the oldest area of the city, one of the oldest areas in the city.
Correct.
And you had said then that was an area where it's also a safety thing because of the fire hydrant.
6 and 7 are the highest safety concerns that we have so far.
There's kind of dead end water line, those there. And stops.
So I guess the question now on the table is do we weigh equity over safety and leaks? Do we do 7 and as much as we can get through 6 based on this 2016 data that we have? Or do we go area 7 and knock out pretty much the entire 8 as a result? Based on where I'm hearing the discussion go, that's pretty much where we're limited to at this time.
And if you also do 8, then you can double up and do the other work. You can have a separate pile on at the same time and not have to go back and do the construction.
You subtracted the streets that have been done already. So if you do 6, we're saying 7 and 8,
No, if you're just doing 6
just 6.
with 40% escalation instead of 2016, which is reasonable. Yeah, 4 million.
Is that hold on a second, is that subtracting what has already been done?
This is 7. We're talking about strictly 7.
Strictly 7.
2.835, 40% escalation, you're at 4 million.
So
So that's-
7, based on dollars, 7.
That's all you have.
Miss Sally?
Yeah.
Certainly.
The area 6, the 3.5 streets that have already been completed, is that subtracted from this amount?
Yes, originally, in the original, back when, it was 3.3. And based on what was done, we've subtracted that to about 2.5. So when you look at what that looks like, inflation, the 2.5 in today's dollars, it would be anywhere between 2.88 and 3.51, it looks like on my chicken scratch.
And how much did you say for area 7?
Area 7 in today's dollars, we're looking at anywhere between 3.2 and 3.89.
You're probably at pushing close to 3.9 million. From 2016 to now, you're looking at least a 30-40% escalation.
So there's not enough money to do 7 and 8.
All of 7.
Yeah,
You can do 7.
you can do all of 7, and then on a separate project, you can use ARPA funds to do 8 1. Entirely up to you. If or any other areas that you can pinpoint.
Right.
But that discussion doesn't have to happen. That decision doesn't have to happen tonight. What really needs to happen tonight, have at least some direction as far as which area needs to be in this net mod application.
Have you gotten that yet?
Well, what does he recommend? I mean, if he's looked at all the information, what do you recommend?
Your turn.
So,
All of 7.
yeah, I would
And
do
nothing
all.
else?
Yeah, I mean, if you were gonna, try to get, for lack of a better phrase, bang for your buck, you want as much as you can in the area, what's been discussed, and I would do so, and I would do as much as I can. And, if at the time that you bid the project out for 2 years, you have additional dollars, we can expand the scope at that time, let's expand the scope, but, we don't have a lot of time, and so we have need all over the city. Forget about that. I would just say.
7.
And a couple points from Rick here. Keep in mind that 6 and 7, that line that's drawn between those areas is really an imaginary line. We can do work in 7 and drift into 6, or we can do work in 6 and drift into 7. There's nothing stopping us from crossing an imaginary line between those two zones. And then this might help understand the 2016 report that we're working from. The first priority, this is out of the report that we're referencing. They state that the first priority is replacing, so that's priority 1. The first priority is replacing dead end lines, dead end 2-inch water lines, so that the need for flushing is reduced, water quality improves, line breaks reduced, and fire protection is improved. The second priority, which is priority 2, is to replace the remaining looped 0.2-inch water lines, especially in backyards. So the priority that was set by the study in 2016 wasn't really based on leaks. It was based on what they are explaining here in their report. Based on what I'm reading.
Miss Sally had a question.
Well, not
Yes,
really.
ma'am.
Sorry.
What you're saying, now, 6 and 7 are they have a lot of dead ends. correct?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, so by prioritizing area 7 first, and then doing what we can in 6, and specifically working on the dead end areas, if we can do a little bit of that part, it will save on our water loss,
Which was priority 2.
which will save the city lots of money.
In addition to that, if we remember our 3 top priorities, Ms. Sally, if you don't mind me cutting you off, we said number 1 was quality. Number 2 was the leaks, and we could technically sprinkle in security because we know should probably be number 1. And then the 3 was the pressure. We know we're very far from 3, but if we're gonna stick with 1 and 2, then yes, in that case, for that purpose and for that sense, then yes, 6 and 7 would take the priority.
And whatever we can do,
And then 8 would be lumped in with what ARPA funds we get, whatever ARPA stands for.
Okay.
Is that what you said?
Yes, it is. ARPA stands for American Rescue Plan Act.
Two sites that are small.
My understanding is yes, and we'll have this verified here briefly.
The only time I've ever had any trouble with water pressure is when TxDOT blows up the main line over. Unit 5. So personally, I'm happy with the water on Rock there. I'm on there. Yeah.
So as
There's only 2.
Come to my
Yes,
house,
ma'am.
I want water.
this issue on
Mary Melody,
whatever it is.
It's in zone 9. We're not even-
Already done.
the drainage is not the water lines.
But you're only talking 2 lines.
2 lines. I would have to look at the distance and the cost for those 2.
Lots of them 2-inch lines.
145 feet. 945 feet on Mary. So it's not a tiny project. It's 145 feet.
But we don't have 7,
I mean, what does that equate to?
which I didn't know.
250,000. So just Marion would ballpark in yesterday's dollars would be 250. In yesterday's dollars would be about 250 to replace that 945 ballpark. See, we have a commitment already. We have a commitment. If she wins a lotto.
And on those Melody and on those Mary and Melody lines, once again, those are easement
I got
2-inch
you.
lines
Yes,
that we
ma'am.
would end up.
For 7 or 6 and they're 2 lines.
Got you.
Yeah. But also, we don't have the text about issues because we live in 7. And that's when I was up there, I was like, I don't know, but this has turned out to be a pretty good meeting for us, I guess.
Well,
So you want to move.
We don't have. to-
so
For 7.
I guess I'll do this as best as we can with Robert's rules, I guess, if we can't even illustrate it this time, but it sounds like we have a motion on the floor that states prioritize on 7, any leftovers on 6 and or carry forward to the 2-inch lines on Marion. Correct? Correct? That's the motion on the floor. All in favor? Let the record reflect that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 12 hands raised. Any opposed? Got 2 hands up. You can't trick me like that. Any opposed? Excellent. Looks like we've got a total of 4 abstained, so you got 12-4. 12-0-4. What was the count there? So I wanted you guys to understand, and this has been a very short voyage into what we look at day in and day out. More is necessary, right? More is necessary. The bottom line is we don't have enough to fix everything. And we do need to do more. But this is a step in the first direction of where we need to go. We'll continue to have workshops and meetings like this so that hopefully the next time we're ready to either attack another grant, anything else, we know our priority now. We know our priority. We know what everybody said. I think, Pat, do you have what you need? Jen, are you good?
So
Uh,
people can speak to the council.
So the plan immediately after this is for me to meet with that young man so we can put something together. We'll be here a very long time tonight, probably between tonight, email, what have you, so we can start putting together. Our hopes is to have something before them by the 14th, which will be this next Monday, as a preliminary discussion as to what we would like to bring forward. And again, the rush timeline is not us. Pat will say it himself. The way that HGAC and GLO have handled the situation has made it kind of a hurry up and wait. But we're back in hurry up now to make sure we get a good formidable application that we feel very comfortable with for that January 9th deadline, because the application is several hundred pages thick.
So would it help for those that were here tonight, if it's there for the council?
You must be looking through my notes. The next step is if any of you will be available on the 14th, the evening of, and would like to come and speak in favor of this, should we get it all finalized in the public agenda. It is a Monday. It is at 6 p.m. And if you're able to make it, or if you would like to send something we would read in the record, we're more than welcome to do that as well.
And many thanks to the people who brought cookies and bread.
Yes, those were delicious.
And
Steve,
I have one question for Patrick, I believe.
Okay,
If he can just review it's my understanding that what part of the process with the application is a 14-day public comment period. Patrick, is that correct?
That is correct.
well, what'll happen is we will go forward. Assume that we put a draft application out, assuming that it's correct. If I speak out of turn, let me know. It goes out for 14 days. And then we submit what would be the final for review at the December meeting. Dot all I's, cross all T's, and then it gets submitted well ahead of that January 9th deadline. We're trying to balance holidays, timelines, 14 days between our meeting schedule to try to avoid another special meeting. If there's any questions after we depart that may be left unanswered, that it may have been unanswered, please feel free to come up and ask us. We wanted to stop at a reasonable time. We thank everybody for your time. We'll continue to have more of these so we together can address the needs of the community to move these things forward. I'm very as well. Thank you all. Be blessed, be safe. Have a good night. Thank you.